Senator Roger Wicker is a Republican representing the state of Mississippi, and he joins us tonight. Senator, thanks for coming on. What is the American national security interest that would be served by regime change in Syria?
Well, if you care about Israel, you have to be interested at least in what's going on in Syria. We're fighting ISIS there. Iran is seeking to dominate the whole region. I think we have national interests in Syria. But let me say this about what candidate Trump may have said, or what he said before he was a candidate. You know, there is information you receive when you're president of the United States that you really don't have as a candidate. And I appreciate the president putting a team around him that I have confidence in. Secretary Mattis and General Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I think are going to give the president good advice. John Bolton's starting today, and I
there are
think,
smart and decent people around him.
They're going to tell him what he needs to hear.
Well, and there certainly a lot of those people are smart. But I just want to get back to the core question that I think a lot of voters have, which is what's the American national security interest that is served? You said if you care about Israel, I do care about Israel, but what's the American national security interest that would be served by regime change? You can think of a lot of potential downsides, deaths, cost, etc. How would this country become safer by overthrowing Assad?
I'm not sure that regime change is still our goal there. It was the goal of Barack Obama. It hasn't really been our stated goal during this Trump administration. But defeating ISIS in Iraq and in Syria is still our goal. And I think that is in the national interest.
But wasn't defeating ISIS one of the goals of the Assad government? Of course, ISIS was a radical Sunni group. Assad is an Alawite allied with the Shiites. He was fighting ISIS as well. So why wouldn't we, if we believe ISIS is the main enemy, functionally find ourselves on the side of Assad?
Well, you're correct in this sense, and you're correct in many ways. It's complicated in Syria. There's no question about it. I mean, there's not a bunch of white hats and a bunch of black hats. So I'll give you that. We are, and we're not in the business of regime change, so I would challenge that. But it is within our national interest to make sure ISIS is defeated, and we've almost got the job done. I just think it would be a mistake to pull away at this point. I'm very interested in the questions you're asking about whether this is some sort of a hoax, or whether this poison gas attack really didn't happen, was done by someone else.
Well, I'm not suggesting that.
That's a question that Mr. Putin is asking, and he has a right to ask it, and so do you. I find myself on the other side of that issue.
I'm not sure I understand the implication. I'm not sure I understand the implication of adding Putin to that equation.
He's asking. I'm just saying it's a question
that's not relevant. Slow down, Senator. That's not relevant to why I asked the question, and I hope you're not trying to impugn my motive by tying me to Putin, as so many on the left do. Let me ask again. We were told a year ago that the sarin gas attack in Syria was committed by regime forces, by Assad's regime. We learned 2 months ago that we don't really know that we were lied to about that. I would think as a U.S. Senator, you would have an interest in getting to the truth, because the truth matters, doesn't it?
I think it's perfectly fine for someone in a position like you to ask that question.
Why aren't you asking the question?
I'm convinced. Well, I've been listening to a lot over the last year, and for my purposes, I'm convinced that Bashar Assad was very much involved in the attack a year ago. The United Nations Security Council is currently, based on information I've heard, I think the United Nations
Can you characterize it for us? Because the Secretary of Defense. I'm sorry, I wouldn't typically interrupt you, but you suggested that I was somehow allied with Putin. So I think I can press you on this question.
I'm suggesting that you asked the same question that he asked, and that's fair.
So I must be a Russian agent. I get it, right?
I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that.
Because it's a very obvious question, actually. And the Secretary of Defense said 2 months ago that we didn't have proof, but you apparently have proof that the Secretary of Defense doesn't have. Could you characterize it for us?
No. I'm not going to get into that further.
Okay. So are you satisfied that we know for a fact that the Assad regime, acting against its own strategic interests, was behind the chlorine gas attack this weekend?
And as I was about to say, Tucker, the UN Security Council is looking at that very issue right now. The President of the United States has concluded that, in fact, Bashar Assad was involved in this and was responsible for it. And I assume he's making that statement based on the best facts he can get from the Secretary of Defense and from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and his incoming National Security Advisor.
Okay, well, I guess Putin and I would like a little more detail on that before we launch a new war on the basis of it. And do you think that's a fair question to ask?
I think you are asking interesting questions, and they need to be asked. Where I come down is that we have a strategic interest there, and it doesn't make sense for us to leave without getting the job done. I would be results-based in Syria rather than timeline-based.
Okay. Well, that was revealing. Thank you, Senator. I appreciate it.